everybody, how's it going? This is Eden Maybon of LightCycleAstrology.com. Welcome back to the channel, friends, and I hope you had a great weekend. Today we are preparing for Saturn's entrance into the sign of Pisces. This is a big changeover. This doesn't actually occur until around March 7th, but as of January the 30th, last Monday, we see that Saturn is now falling under the beams of the sun, meaning that he is no longer visible in the sky as an evening star. Now, before we get into today's topic, I want to let everybody know that this channel is funded by my consultation service at LightCycleAstrology.com. We are accepting new clients for 2023, so if you're interested in becoming a client, please visit me on LightCycleAstrology.com. So let's get into this. Let's pull up the real-time clock and get a look at this transition period that Saturn finds himself in. So there is the sun at 10 degrees and 44 minutes in Aquarius on January the 30th and Saturn at 25 degrees and 43 minutes in Aquarius. So if you do the math, there's about 15 degrees of separation between the sun and Saturn. And this degree range is when Saturn loses visibility. But this happens one time a year, this annual cycle that the sun and Saturn have, where the sun moves around the zodiac throughout the year, and at some point catches up to Saturn, passes over Saturn, and then continues on his way through the zodiac faster than Saturn. So this dance that they call the synodic cycle is usually representative of a metaphorical death and rebirth. As the sun catches up to the backside of Saturn, Saturn loses visibility, and this, in the ancient world, represented the planet's ability to manifest things out in the world becomes weakened. It's as if the planet is no longer visible, meaning that the archetypal features of the planet may still happen on a certain level, but it's not visible, or it doesn't manifest, or at least it's difficult from that point forward because it's weakened, or it's not having its own ability to really have a bold, decisive way to make things come about in the world in whatever archetypal fashion that planet likes to do things in. So this synodic cycle is it's very amazing that it is happening right as Saturn is getting ready to change signs, because Saturn has spent the last 5 years running through his temples. He has had his own autonomy. He has not had to filter through the archetypal qualities of any other sign lord. He is his own sign lord. He's his own manager. He's his own boss in the sign of Capricorn and Aquarius, but that is all about to change, and he's about to lose dignity as he moves into the sign of Pisces. He will then begin having to filter his Saturnine ways through Jupiter types of things. So the fact that this synodic cycle is happening right exactly as Saturn is about to ingress out of his temple is very interesting. So we'll talk about what that means. But this is the moment on January 30th where if you were to go out and look at the sunset, you would see that you might see, this is the last day perhaps, that Saturn is in the western sky and he's very, very dimly visible. After this point, the sun and Saturn are just too close. The twilight has not had enough time to drain out of the sky after sunset before Saturn sets below the western horizon like the sun previously had. Before this point, we enjoyed Saturn as a visible evening star. You could go out, the sun would go down, the sky would darken up slowly over the hour of twilight, and there, boom, you would see Saturn in the sky. So that is what happens right now, is that the visibility of Saturn is no longer strong enough to blast through the twilight, the remaining light, the residual light left over after sunset, before Saturn sets. In the ancient world, that was extremely important and emblematic of a planet's ability to manifest things. If the planet was invisible, it was thought to be ineffectual. So it would still try to do Saturn kinds of things, but do they work out? That is the question that begins right now. So as we march forward here, we're just going to take a look at this day by day. Here comes the sun catching up to Saturn, and the cazimi between Saturn and sun happens right around February the 15th February 16. So that is technically when the synodic cycle resets. That's technically when the metaphorical rebirth happens after the death of Saturn. But the rebirth, interestingly enough, takes place in the last 2 degrees of Aquarius. So Saturn gets reborn in his own temple. He's reborn still within his own domicile, within his own authority. That is extremely interesting. But the nuance of the thing is that the authority doesn't last. While technically Saturn is reborn within his own temple and begins that new synodic cycle for the next year within his own temple, actually even his own Egyptian terms or bounds, which I don't have shown in the chart here, but he's also in his own terms or bounds right now. This does not last because as we go forward in time, we see that by February the 19th, the sun jumps into Pisces. And now the sun and Saturn begin to gain separation. So we're working towards the recovery of Saturn right now as Saturn and the sun gain separation. Saturn was thought to symbolically be recovering from the death. And this would be thought of as a full recovery by right around March 5th, March 6th, as now you see that there is about 15 degrees of separation on the other side of Saturn with the sun now. So this is when you see the rebirth of Saturn appear again in the sky, but now as a morning star. So now you have to go out before the sky brightens up, preceding the dawn, preceding the sunrise. We see that Saturn will be now in the eastern sky, shining his light. But just as Saturn becomes visible, look what happens. Boom. The next day, Saturn changes into signs and loses his own dignity, loses the domicile rulership. Now Saturn is working on behalf of Jupiter. That is quite the story here, I think. So it's pretty nuanced, but let's get into some of the meaning. Now, as you guys know, I usually will share some notes here on this, what this all means. Let me pull those up now. Okay, so interpreting what this all means. So this could be thought of as themes or just different ways in which this may take place that I've sort of come up with here. But one way in which you might see this sort of happen is that it could be that we are remaining clear on what our duties are, our ideologies and perspectives. But there should be like a period where we go through trying to accomplish them in the same way, using the same methods or techniques that has worked before, maybe increasingly getting harder and harder. So because we see that Saturn remains in his own temple as the synodic cycle resets itself and Saturn is reborn in those last degrees of his own temple, we may hold on to that very rigid way of doing things. You know, Saturn is a planet that is already a pretty rigid guy, right? He's thought of in modern astrology as the ruler of like structures. And I don't think that that is far off, although that wasn't mentioned, strictly speaking, in the ancient language and texts. You get the sense that Saturn, you know, he rules Capricorn, he rules Aquarius. He's a guy that doesn't move very fast. He represents things that are old. He represents the past. Those are all things that don't, you know, they're not, you wouldn't think of them as like agile by any stretch of the imagination. So not only that, but we're talking about Aquarius, which is the middle month within the 3 months of winter. That middle month within any season is always the month that stabilizes the changeover into that new season. So we're talking about that solid or fixed or stabilizing modality that Aquarius has, a planet that is rigid. There may be a way in which you're still clear about your duties. You still are holding on to certain ideologies or perspectives, still within that, working within those parameters, but somehow or another thinking or holding those perspectives or performing duties becomes increasingly difficult, even though you're doing them or thinking about them in exactly the same way as you were before. I could see the symbolism working out that way, where that rebirth, that preparation for Saturn to ingress into a new sign and eventually lose autonomy on some level, having to filter through then the workings of Jupiter. I could see that there is a moment where you're holding on, right? But it's just not working anymore somehow or another. So that is one way in which I could see the meaning of this coming forth. Okay, another way would be a period where duties, again, ideologies and perspectives in parentheses here. We're talking about an air sign here in Aquarius. A period where duties, ideologies, or perspectives are met but go unnoticed. This is the same kind of thing where you see that the synodic cycle resets in Aquarius within, Saturn is still within his own temple, within his own terms even. But are those duties perpetuating? Are those ideologies hanging on? But now the invisibility represents people not noticing them. Like it's like the unsung, laborer that's just out there, just plowing away, just doing what he always has, But now nobody sees, nobody cares. Your deeds go unsung, unpraised, unnoticed. It's like they're invisible. You're working hard, and not that we always need credit for doing our duties, because on one level it's kind of better, I would say, to do your duties and not look for the reward, just because we all have to pull our own weight. And but at the same time, it is frustrating when you do those things and at least nobody sees them, nobody notices, even if they don't say anything to you, right? After a while, that becomes to feel not so great. So that is a second way in which I could see things going forward for this period of changeover for Saturn. Okay, a third way I could see this is going through a metaphorical or ideological perspective death, but very privately on your own terms. So I'm actually playing with the ancient language here, because Saturn is in his own bounds or in his own terms within Aquarius. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, if this is something that you're unfamiliar with, in the ancient Egyptian or Ptolemaic systems in the ancient world, each sign was broken up into smaller divisions within the sign that were said to be ruled by one of the planets. The lights did not have terms or bounds in a sign, but Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn all had certain divisions within that sign that was said to be a place where they were empowered, or doing things within their own autonomy within that sign. So interestingly, we see that Saturn is still in Aquarius. He's the ruler of Aquarius, but he also is at the end of Aquarius going through his own bounds or terms. So I'm wondering if you don't see this working out in such a way where there is some kind of metaphorical, ideological perspective death. Things have to become somewhat destabilized right now in order for the transition to happen, where Saturn moves into Pisces and then begins having to express through Jupiter types of ways. But on the way there, this whole notion where Saturn is invisible, but still somehow in his own temple, in his own terms, it's very nuanced. It could be that this happens, but it does so very privately in your own or on your own terms. What do you get when you get Saturn, who is already he's already the rebel? Saturn is already the outsider, right? He's already the guy that has distance. He's the furthest planet from the sun. He represents that being distant, outsider, isolated, loneliness, suffering. What do you get when the outsider becomes invisible? It kind of paints a picture, or gives me an image where back in when I was going to high school, you would show up and everybody would be congregating in their different friend groups, right? And you would always have sort of the I guess in my day they were called like the stoners or what have you. But you would have the group that was kind of the outsider group, right? You would have different groups. You would have groups that were more like popular, quote unquote, mainstream kinds of friends. You'd have all the different cliques. But it's as if you get to high school and you're used to seeing, the guy wearing like the Megadeth t-shirt with the ripped jeans and the leather jacket, who's usually out there smoking a cigarette and most likely going to be late or whatever to class, is just not there. Now it's as if the guy that's normally kind of the outsider is even more outsider. He's so outsider, he's not even seen at all. So this makes me wonder if there isn't some symbolism around ways in which we hold certain of our own unique perspectives or ideological viewpoints. If somehow those things begin to change, but we don't want anybody to notice. We don't share it with anybody because the innate quality is to sort of hold them privately anyway. And now with the invisibility factor coming in, it's like, there's no way you're going to share that. But you do this on your own terms, I think, is the very important symbolism here. Okay, I've belabored that one enough. A fourth way I could see this going forward is a transitionary period, untying perspectives out of a rut, out from under stoic, stark, cold realism, and becoming more serious about holding more flexible, hopeful, optimistic, religious, or romantic viewpoints. So this is the transitionary symbolism itself, where we see that Saturn is coming out of that fixed or solid temple of Aquarius, the modality of the middle of the season of winter, where things become very solid and stabilized, the light becoming stable, the winter weather becoming fully winter and set into that cold. But now Saturn is moving out of that. He's moving closer towards the spring. He's moving into a pre-springtime sign that is ruled by a planet that has definitely more of a optimistic viewpoint. So are there perspectives that are being untied slowly right now, preparing for the way for things to become less rigid, broken out of a rut, moving out from under a more stoic, sturdy, stark, cold kind of realism or understanding. And then we see Saturn moving into Pisces. So that seriousness that Saturn represents is now serious, but serious about being more Jupiter kinds of seriousness, like hopeful, optimistic, maybe religious or spiritual, maybe even romantic. These are ways in which we see the seriousness of our life shifting from maybe some very mental Aquarian types of perspectives or understandings or ways that become somehow they have to transition into more Piscean ways. That has to do somehow with things that are more optimistic, so flexible, right? Because Jupiter is a bit more flexible than Saturn. He's at least willing to look out and see some broad optimism out there. Whereas Saturn is like, no. This, just keep your nose to the grindstone. This is how it's always been done before. Or in Aquarius, that's more like Capricorn, I guess. In Aquarius, it's more like, this is my idea. And if you try to change it, I'm just going to be like a rubber band and snap back anyway. This is what I think. I know I should think this, and not heaven or earth is going to change this. I actually have I've known a lot of Aquarian sun signs, and my son himself is Aquarius rising. So I have this joke that I talk about Aquarius is that I feel like sometimes people that have strong Aquarian placements, they have this sort of rubber band mental quality where, like, I used to have a best friend when I was growing up, and he was an Aquarius sun sign. And it was always funny because he was always so confident with his own ideas or perspectives. And I sometimes, as friends do, we challenge each other. And so sometimes I would be like, hey, what about this idea? What about that idea? What if it's like this? And I noticed that after some years of having this friendship, that it seemed like this Aquarian sturdiness was kind of like a rubber band. You could temporarily pull it back. You could temporarily get them to go, oh, I see what you're saying there. And maybe it holds on for a few days, but then it almost always seems to just snap back. And then like you run into your friend a couple days later and he's like, nope, nope, nope. I'm still thinking what I used to think. So I've noticed that about Aquarius, that very sturdy mental quality where you can stretch it a little bit. You can maybe even bend it back like a rubber band for a while. But Aquarius has a tendency to, hold on to certain perspectives, come hell or high water until they're ready to move them. But this is different. This is Saturn having to lose dignity, move into a sign that he does not rule. So there's a certain amount of like untying that needs to happen to get that to come about. So I could see a period where we go through untying certain perspectives that we've just really been holding on to for a while. Okay. The fifth way in which I could see a way in which we can interpret this period going forward here is a changing of commitments described by the contrasting natures of Saturn to Jupiter. So simply that this is a lot like the fourth way, but this is just simply that we're going to interpret the contrast of the nature of the ruling planets themselves. So you simply say, what is Saturn like? How does he like to do things? Which way do things come about through his methods? And what is the difference between the way he does things and the way Jupiter does things? So changing commitments, but through the comparison of the methods of Saturn to the methods of Jupiter, or to the archetypal qualities of both of those and comparing them. So, for instance, commitments to Saturn. This is very mentally duty bound, right? We're just going to hold that perspective. We're just going to remain, we're going to toe that line. So whatever duty we think that we have, duty is one of the words that we describe for Saturn. It's not the only thing, of course, but Saturn is a planet of duty. So whatever mental construct you have around, this is my duty, this is what I should be doing with my life, this is who I should be helping, this is what I need to get done for everybody, that might change. And the way in which we could see that described could happen in more of a Jupiter kind of way. So maybe things are shifting in such a way where you say, before I only had duties to my perspective on what I should be doing. Now, all of a sudden, I feel like I need to expand in a way that is maybe more like religious or spiritual, or, in such a way that is like more Jupiter-like. Maybe I need to be more generous. And that is the new description of duty. I need to shift duties away from this way of thinking to this way of believing, right? That would be a good analogy, I think. A way of thinking, or a way of having an ideological perspective to maybe a way of belief. That right there could describe a lot of it, I think, on its own. But that's one you could just play with a little bit and see what it could mean for you, because everybody is going to be having this run through different houses and through different house topics. So personally, the shift is going to be happening in our charts differently. And it would be good to look through the chart and look, okay, what houses is Saturn shifting away from and into? Of course, we'll probably do a rising sign horoscope video for that when the time gets closer and Saturn actually begins to become visible again and move forward into the sign of Pisces. But that's what I have for today. So please leave a comment in the comment section if you have any questions, or you have any of your own reflections on this moment that we're going through with Saturn. I always appreciate that and love to read them. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. I hope you have a great week, and I'll be back again tomorrow with another astrology video. Take care. See you soon. Bye.